I'm gonna give you a little bit of background to how we got here, and then a little bit of where we're going related to stuff. So I work for the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health, because when you go through university bureaucracy to come up with a name, it has to be as long and as inclusive as possible. And since the acronym is SISI, we have tried to avoid using that whenever possible. But our website is Bugwood, and our website is Bugwood because we started off with an entomologist and a forester working together to figure out a way to do their job as outreach specialists better. And somewhere along the way, they hired this little computer nerd to start working for them. I was little at that point. And now, almost 20 years later, we have built a lot of tools, and including EdMaps is what I'm going to primarily talk about today. So we went through this yesterday of all the, anytime there's a committee, somebody grabs me and says, hey, you should be on this. I'm not sure why, but it's ended up that way. But I'm an extension specialist, to make it as simple as possible, with the University of Georgia. And our center logo with the new UGA logo, we developed it as the 4 arrows because we really saw it as the coming together of different disciplines, different areas, and all working with information technology, which is what that says. And here's our team. I'm not going to go through everybody, but part of our success has been that all of our work is done locally. So when there's a problem, when there's a bug with an app, then I can yell at the person in the next room to fix it, and we can fix things very quickly. But going back a little bit farther, it all started with slides. When I first started working at Bugwood, we were collecting slides from all over the country. And if you've seen, and I'll show you in a second, so a lot of the presentations of the last 2 days that have a little number in the bottom corner, all of those came from that collection of slides. We started with photo CDs and then moved to the website. And a lot of our focus initially was on forest health. We had 2,500 pictures when the website launched in 2001. Now we have 254,000 pictures. And all of that, whether it's from forestry images, invasive.org, insect images, weed images, they're all part of this one Bugwood image database. And so there's an example. The older pictures have UGA and then a number, and then the newer pictures have just the number. We realized that since there was no easy way to get to us from the UGA homepage, what was the point in including UGA in front of the number? And in being a Southeastern Conference school, and with the rivalries we have, the University of Florida would not let their pictures go up online with UGA on it. So we ended up having to change. So Forest Health started looking more and more at forest, invasive plants of forest. And so we started working with some folks that were doing that, as well as some biocontrol work, and we released a CD-ROM product, or DVD-ROM product, that shows how old I am, that collected all this information together. Well, the problem was we didn't have any maps. When you went to the USDA plants database, the maps were not complete. And so how can you tell a story about a problem if you don't have a map showing how bad the problem is? And so we said, what can we do? Well, we looked, and there was a lot of different databases, a lot of different networks, a lot of different folks mapping stuff, either very specific region or very specific taxa. And so we said, these were all maps for Japanese honeysuckle, and they don't even agree with each other. And this, to me, and I meant to check this again, but this was a distribution on the plants database of Japanese honeysuckle in Georgia. Since we've launched EdMaps, we've been able to document it in every single county in Georgia. So, it's so common. Why collect the herbarium specimen? Why document it? But if you were saying that Japanese honeysuckle is found all across the Southeast, and you pull up a distribution map, and this is what it looks like, how correct is that? So we started looking at what was around. And the biggest success story when it comes to invasive plants and citizen science was the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England. And so we talked to them about how they did things. We figured out, what worked, what didn't work. Unfortunately, one of the best things that worked about them, other than Les Meerhoff, was having a volunteer coordinator, having somebody who pushed the program and pushed the the idea of getting citizens, getting the public, even getting professionals to report things. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. We also looked at the North American Invasive Plant Mapping Standards. We looked at ArcGIS and said, this is too complicated, this is why nobody does mapping. So thank goodness, about the same time that that we were doing this, Google launched a way to do maps online. They launched the Google Maps API. So Google Maps had been out for a while, but there was not a way that you could overlay your data on top of Google Maps. But about the same time we were working on this, that product came out. So then it was, this is what it looked like to collect data. And this is Rebecca Wallace, our data coordinator. You got your camera on your back, you got your GPS unit, you got your notepad, and you go out and collect data. Well, that doesn't work very well. So somebody mentioned earlier today that, hey, we have these. Most everybody has these. So why smartphones? So let's get back to the pythons. You have a python problem in Florida. Pythons are showing up. What can we do about it? How can we find a solution for the pythons? So Allison Higgins, who was in the video on the Daily Show, she had started this Python patrol in the Keys. And as part of that Python patrol, they had a telephone number, 1-8 something, I've got one. Okay? That was the telephone number. You called that number in the Keys. That's what the Python patrol started as. They targeted FedEx drivers. They targeted folks with the power companies. They said, when you find a Python, call this number and report it. They figured out that part. So as the Python problem continued to grow, the Everglades Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area put together this field guide, this field cards of identifying the snakes, because a lot of people see a corn snake or see a water snake and think it's a python. So why not have a way to make it easier to do? So we said, okay, let's make an app for that. This was in 2002, maybe? No, 2010, I think was when it came out. And we said, okay, we'll make an app for that. We'll take this simple card deck, turn it into an app. Was the app very good? No. I programmed it. I can say it was not very good. It didn't work well. There were too many limitations on what it could do based on the way the software was at the time. But it got a lot of press. People said, oh, pythons, there's an app for that. You know, it got picked up by newspapers. It got picked up by hunting magazines, gun magazines. You know, it got a lot of attention. So we said, okay, what's next? So, you know, when the iPhone was released, Steve Jobs said, hey, this is the ultimate digital device. You know, it is a phone, an internet communicator, and a music player. Does everything. Well, we started thinking about it, and even more, it's a camera, it's a field guide, it's your field notebook, and it's a GPS that pretty much you always have with you. And so let's take advantage of that. So we built an app first for iPhone and then for Android called I've Got One. The Park Service funded it. All the agencies in Florida cooperated on it, and we released this app. This app, because of pythons in Florida, became the model for all the rest of the apps we did after that. So if it had not been for the pythons and that problem in Florida, then we wouldn't have had the Outsmart Invasives app. We wouldn't have had the different apps that feed into EdMaps. And so as the iPhone screen got larger and we hired a full-time iPhone programmer, I joked that, you know, the 4 only had 4 lines and the 5 added 1 and then the 6 added 1 more. And I said, we got to keep filling up the screen. Well, now we're on to the second screen. So that sounds pretty dang easy. You hire somebody, you write an app, you create it. So why was it easy? Well, the reason it was easy is because EdMaps already existed. We already had and this server infrastructure in place that would allow us to submit those records and then go somewhere. So this platform that we launched soft launched in 2005 for the Southeast, and then it slowly grew from there to pretty much covering the entire United States, was built to do 2 things. We needed a common operating platform, and this came from a friend of mine in the Corps of Engineers. He said, what can we, you know, there's some level for it. It's got to be a common operating platform. Everybody's got to exist on the same platform. And then have very easy electronic reporting. Make it simple at that time from the web to report something, and there'd be a follow-up. So, and I don't have the example in here, but there's a case where a, sacred ibis was found in Florida. Somebody reported it with their iPhone. The email alert got sent out, and within 3 hours, USDA Wildlife Services went out and removed, nice way of saying it, that bird. So EdMap started in 2005. Here's the website. Here's the process. We collect data from a whole lot of different sources. Okay, whether it be web forms, smartphone apps, embedded forms on other people's websites, dumps, partners we share data with. IMAP Invasives, we're sharing the data from New York back and forth. Routinely, we update that data. All of that comes into EdMaps and creates a new report. Well, when that new report comes in, if it did not come from a trusted source, then it goes through a verification process. It's sent out. If it's a regulatory species, if it's Asian longhorn beetle, it goes to APHIS, it goes to the State Department of Ag, so they know about it first. If not, we've got these network of volunteer verifiers who review it and release it. Then after that, an alert sent. User alerts are a feature within EdMaps where people can sign up for and find out when things have been verified in their area. The maps are built, and the data feeds that go to be shared with other databases are available. We were doing all this on UGA servers, and you know, university networks cannot always be the most reliable. So we had a problem, the servers went down, we said we gotta have a solution to this. And so all of our infrastructure moved to Amazon's web services, and all the sites are hosted there now. So has it worked? So here's the boring bar graphs. So don't worry about all the details. I just kind of wanted to show an overview. So we've had over 160 downloads of the iPhone apps. For whatever reason, less of Android. I think Android users just don't download as many apps. And we had this really pretty graph. You know, we were able to show, hey, in 2012, we were getting a handful of smartphone reports, and then each year, the web reports stayed about the same, but we started getting more and more iPhone and Android alerts. And so in 2015, things were moving along pretty well. We were getting an average of 41 reports nationwide a day. Most reports in one day was 260, and we got 14,000 reports that year from 2,000 different individuals. And those are reports that are coming in from the smartphone or from the website. And, you know, going back to the education part of it, Utah, Ontario, Florida, Nevada, New York, Georgia, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Jersey, Indiana, Maryland, all of these states have education programs in place. Going back to iPaint, they are doing something to promote the product in one way or the other. In New York, these are primarily spiderwing Drosophila and brown marmalade stink bug reports, because they have an active program, and when you count insects, sometimes you count the traps a little bit different. So then we jump to 2016, and the number skyrockets. We get 152 average a day, and the most reports we had in a day was 1,400. So what happened? Well, it messed my graph up. It's not pretty anymore. I got this big chunk of iPhone users here, and so what happened? Well, Minnesota DNR bought a whole bunch of iPads and sent crews out and said, document everything you find. We launched an app in Georgia for the county agents to document spread of native insect pests across time. So every day for their county, they would go in and put in, you know, once a week, they would put in what they were seeing that week. And so those numbers, you know, keep on going up. But if you look at the rest of the numbers stay about the same. The folks in Utah are not happy that they got eclipsed by these other two states, and the folks in Florida, where most of it started, are still not happy that Ontario is above them. But 2017, things are staying about the same. Minnesota DNR is still doing their project. We're seeing a graph, that should be on target to where we were last year, or a little bit the same, and a very similar graph. There's more activity, I think, in New York so far with the Phytoandrosophila and the stink bug data. So I said, okay, we've got all this data. There's about 3 million records in EdMaps, but let's break it down a little bit better. There's about 150,000 records that have come from citizens or professionals reporting things. So what was interesting was 98% of the reporters have less than 1,000 records, and 94% of the reporters have less than 100 records. Of the 150,000 reports that were individually sent in. And what I think is important about that is when you look at Texas Invaders, a very successful program, Karen Rollins, who used to be there and now works for us, had about 30 or 40% of all the records in Texas Invaders. If you look at iPain, Les Merhoff had a huge amount of those records. Maybe over 50% of the records were ones Les had entered. So having this distribution of folks, you don't lose 1 or 2 champions and completely use it. So I also said, and this was really interesting because I updated the slide from last year, and now Naturalist has actually doubled in the amount of overall records that they've gotten in the last year. But we wanted to compare some things and see where EdMap stood up. And no, we're never going to be eBird with 274 million records. But what's also interesting is, of the almost 800,000 in GBIF, 274 million of those are eBird. So there's a huge chunk of this data that is actually this data. And, we've got 13,000 contributors, either from data sources or individuals contributing to EdMaps. There's only 14,000 data sets in GBIF total. So in my opinion, that's a success because of the limited focus of EdMaps. Now, we're working, and I think this is going to be really great, with a project with Encyclopedia of Life to start bringing in that iNaturalist data for invasive species in the EdMap. So if somebody reports an Asian longhorn beetle into iNaturalist, then that report will go to EdMaps and it will trigger the alerts to the folks. This was also interesting. We looked at all the data in EdMaps for Florida, and 82% of it was plant data. We looked at it for smartphones, and 42% of it was animals. So there's that change where when people are actually using the phones to report the animals that are a lot harder to take pictures of and everything. We saw a map similar to this yesterday. This is our county distribution map of how many records per county. Obviously, the states with the bigger counties, we have more records in, and there's definitely some hot spots as well, but just an interesting way to look at it. So again, why has this worked? As I get close to running out of time. It's worked because of education. It's worked because of people on the ground at the local level. Here's an Indiana flyer that was done talking about it. The Ontario project, it's the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters that are pushing that. They're going out, they're talking to people about invasive species, and they're saying, what can you do? They even have this great online social media presence where they have Map It Mondays, and they say, here's a species, here's how you report it. If you see it, report it. And so every week on Twitter, they do these Map It Mondays. Florida has done the billboards. The telephone number, the website, the app, these are both billboards that exist in South Florida, focusing on reporting invasive species. And this, an article about an anaconda, because if it can happen in Florida, it will happen in Florida. But this article is pretty short. It was just a press release. Somebody saw an anaconda, but I think this was the important thing. This incident shows why it's important to report wildlife. If you see something, here's 3 different ways to report it. And this, if you don't get any other message from my talk today, is, this is something to keep in mind. Unified messaging across the state, no matter if it's a marine invasive or a terrestrial plant or whatever, try to figure out a way to make that happen. So what's next? I thought this quote from Apple CEO was great. When you decide what the future, you want to be there as soon as you can. The future of EdMaps is an app that we're developing called EdMaps Pro. The goal of that app is you choose an area of interest, in this case a county, you download all the data from the cloud onto your device. Then when you go out in the field, you see all those points that have already been found. You don't remap those points. You can click on those, do a revisit, update that information, or you can drop a new point. So the entire interface is map-based. We're demoing this in, we're testing this in Utah and then Montana, because that's where the money came from, and then we're going to launch this nationwide, hopefully by next spring. And the real goal is to start changing the map, start changing the story from here's everything that's infested to here's the records that are infested, here are the ones that have been treated, here are the ones that have actually been eradicated, and here's where we looked and didn't find anything. So that's the next generation. That's changing the map, changing the story. And then we're building some other tools to even help move that forward. Apps are going to continue to be updated. EdMaps is going to continue to grow. We're going to include more interactive keys, more management recommendations, more on-demand resources so the apps aren't so big. Because our future generation of naturalists grew up like this. They grew up with screens, with iPads, with iPhones in front of their faces at all times. And so they're going to expect it, and they're going to want to be able to use these tools as much as they can. Where are we? EdMaps, we built this ultimate aggregator to pull all this data together. We've tried to make it work as good at the local SISMA level as it does for a regional landscape level. And, my question to y'all, and especially looking at climate change, is what can we do better? What are the next steps that are needed? Where do we need to be in 5 years? What do we need to be in 10 years? I've still got a long time before I can retire. And so those kids go a long way before they go to college. So we got to figure out what the next steps are, because in 20 years, I'm going to be coming back to this conference and we're going to have 6 million records on EdMaps or whatever the number is. And we're going to hopefully be able to map things across time and actually be able to prove some of the things we've talked about as the distribution chart starts to change. Buzzwood, EdMaps has all existed because we haven't survived on one pot of money. 1 year we'll get money from one group, 1 year we'll get money from another group. You add all those little pots up and it makes the project work. Would it be easier to have one big NSF grant? Absolutely. What happens when you have a whole bunch of little grants? It keeps you hungry.